Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Bailey. I will be your moderator for this session alongside Professor John Barry. And this plenary is dedicated to examining and debating the systems of provision which are required to meet basic needs within planetary limits. And it's a debate which encompasses a lot of concepts which are by now quite well known and often quite polarizing. That includes universal basic income, universal basic services, the unconditional autonomy allowance, and care payments. And there's all kinds of debates around each of these systems of provision, debates around who in society really benefits from these forms of provision and whether it helps tackle existing inequalities. And there's debates also around affordability and scalability, and compatibility between them, debates surrounding which of these forms of provision really help promote environmental sustainability. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of these in this plenary this morning. Fortunately, we're joined by 4 speakers who are well versed in these debates, and we're delighted that they could join us. We are joined by Otto Andersson, a retired professor of economics, who's written a great deal about basic income, ecological economics, and degrowth. We're joined by Saave, who researches political economy and feminist and ecological economics at the Institute for Sociology at the Friedrich Schiller University Jena. Her area of expertise lies in the external relations of the capitalist mode of production and strategies of socio-economic transformation. We're joined by Vincent Ligy, spokesperson for the French degrowth movement, and a co-author of numerous books, including Exploring Degrowth, a Critical Guide, which was published last year. And we're joined by Maeve Cohen as well, a campaigner, researcher, and organizer, working to build an inclusive economy that serves people and the planet. She, of course, is the founding director of Rethinking Economics, and is now the project lead at the Social Guarantee. So this session today will give each of our panelists 10 minutes to give their opening statements, their presentations, and then we'll give each of the panelists a chance to respond to what the other panelists have said. And after that, we'll open out the conversation more broadly. We'll encourage questions from the digital floor, as it were. And Professor John Barry will be helping me with that. He can see all of the questions in the chat. Okay, so without further ado from me, let's move to our first panelist. Can I give the digital microphone to you, Otto?
Hello. Greetings from a very warm Finland. Well, basic income and degrowth are usually things that ecological green people are fond of, that they think that both are in a way good ways of dealing with our present problems. There are however certain difficulties to at the same time have a full basic income and a degrowth. I will go on from look at this from 2 points of view. On the one hand, we may think that there is a full universal basic income, and I ask whether that would be good for degrowth and the ecological transformation. And the second question is that if we are going for a new Green Deal or for ecological transformation, what kind of basic income would fit in that situation? Next slide, please. Well, if we have a full basic income, what would be the consequences for an ecological transformation and for degrowth? And here there are both things that seems to work well, but others might be more difficult. But anyway, if we had a full basic income, that would make lifestyles less dependent on wage work. And as the situation is now, if we try to give wage work to everybody who wants to have it, in today's system, we need actually economic growth. And that economic growth is usually not consistent with ecological sustainability. So this change in lifestyles and this reduction of dependence on wage work is actually working in the right direction. Also, there would be less need for recognition through consumption. So consumerism could be lessened. And if you have a basic income, the work you do is more of its own reward than just doing it for a wage. Furthermore, if we had a fully basic income, that would encourage activities for care and creativity, and at least locally, but in general also. But the basic income would strengthen local activities, clearly. As an aside here, I heard about a plan in South Korea, which now is on the political table, that you should have a youth dividend for young people, kind of basic income that would give you a local currency which you can use in the local stores. It's difficult to say whether a full basic income would slow down competition and accumulation. Probably competition, but not surely. When we had this basic income experiment in Finland, the government who made it, they believed that basic income would lead to more supply of work than if you are unemployed on unemployment benefit. And to some extent, this really happened. But this means that you are interested in basic income because you think that this will lead to more employment. Now, if we have a situation where we are going for an ecological transformation, want to have a degrowth or something, and anyway, with a basic income, full basic income, and it could be difficult if there was a slowdown of accumulation growth to finance the necessary public services. The tax income for the government could be smaller, especially if you tax just income from work. Well, and in that case, you would have to get money, government money, through a kind of ownership, more ownership of a socialist kind. So this could lead to a step towards eco-socialism, but this would be a slow process, perhaps slower than need for ecological transformation. And the last slide, please. What kind of basic income would we ask for if we are going for a planned ecological transformation? The transformation would need financing of so-called green investments, and also for supporting those sectors and those areas that are hit by the transformation policy. And that means it would be difficult to finance a full universal basic income alongside adequate public services. So my proposal is that we should have a kind of basic income that is a combination of two parts. One, this actually has to do with what I wrote already in the 80s, where I asked for a citizen's income, which would be unconditional, and a citizen's wage, which would be kind of participation income. But where the citizen's income would not fit completely for as a full basic income. Well, but I think that the term we could use is a social dividend, which you could finance from different taxes and profits, especially wealth taxes and environmental taxes, but also maybe on some new technologies and ways of organizing the economy. But this social dividend would not be enough to live on. But we could have on top of that what could be called then a participation income directed to those who take part in the transformation. And it could be dispersed as some kind of scholarships through municipalities and associations. So my proposal for this combination for an ecological transformation would be kind of basic income, not exactly what is usually meant by basic income, but with a social dividend to all unconditionally, and a participation income given to those who need participate and would need an income when they participate in this transformation. Well, thank you. This was my part of the story.
Many thanks, Jan. Also, that was a very provocative start. Excellent. Maeve Cohen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and share my screen because I wasn't organized enough to send my slides in advance. So bear with me. Okay, here we go. Oh, has that worked? Or is it? There we go. Great. Yes, so I'm Maeve. I'm the project lead of the Social Guarantee, and I've been asked to talk about UBS, Universal Basic Services, and the sort of role we think Universal Basic Services and the collective provision of services serves in a just and green economy. So a little bit of background about the Social Guarantee. It was set up by Anna Koot, who's done a lot of work on Universal Basic Services at the end of last year, and we have a task force of very great people who are talking about Universal Basic Services. So people like Ian Goff, Andrew Percy, Anne Pettifer, and others. And we got together to think about how we could promote Universal Basic Services and get it on the political agenda a bit more. So the first thing we did, as you can see, is a framing exercise. We thought that Universal Basic Services doesn't really roll off the tongue. If we talk about UBS, it automatically puts us in opposition to UBI, which we didn't really think was particularly helpful. And we thought it was really up for interpretation. So we decided on the Social Guarantee. We thought the Social Guarantee is a lot easier to grasp as a concept. And so I'm here to just go over what we mean by the Social Guarantee, what the Social Guarantee entails, and how it fits in with a sort of degrowth narrative. And we absolutely see it as that. We see it as the social pillar of a just Green New Deal, is the middle ring of the donut. It's absolutely essential to creating a thriving world within planetary boundaries. So first and foremost, the Social Guarantee is all about meeting people's needs. So a load of work has been done over many, many decades by people like Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum, obviously Ian Goff, talking about what fundamental needs are, what the fundamental things are that people need to have access to in order to be able to live fulfilling lives. And we absolutely know what these things are. And it's not about talking about subjective wants, which we know are limitless. It's talking about objective needs that are sufficient. So you don't go on needing and needing and needing. Once your needs are met, they're met, and that's the end of it. So thinking about needs, we know exactly what people need, and we also know that across the world, including in the wealthiest countries in the world, loads of people are living and these needs aren't being met. So the social guarantee starts there. It's about knowing what needs are and meeting those needs. So just to very quickly go over what some of these needs are, obviously food, people need nutritious food to be able to live, of course. We find obviously in Europe and Britain, the internet is an absolutely fundamental need to be able to participate in society now. You can't really work or be educated without access to the internet, let alone communicate with others. We've got transport, obviously, you need to be able to get about to doctor's appointments, to work, the rest of it. And it's essential that these transport systems fit within the planetary boundaries. These need to be sustainable transport systems. We need housing that obviously includes the houses over our head, but it means utilities like water and energy and the rest of it. Childcare, adult social care, people that aren't able to look after themselves, we need to be able to support the most vulnerable in society. Healthcare, of course, we need our bodies to be able to function, and education. And it's not on this slide, but yeah, I've alluded to it before. None of these needs can be met in a burning planet. It's absolutely essential that we are within planetary boundaries. Yeah, so it's important to recognize that you can't always buy what you need. So some of these things like healthcare and education are prohibitively expensive, and you wouldn't be able to afford them unless you were very, very rich, if you individually were trying to access them yourself. So the collective provision of some of these services is absolutely essential. Also, some services like food are much more based on individual preferences, and it doesn't really make sense to have the state delivering food packages to people. So some of these services should be bought individually, and yeah, so this is a sort of spectrum of what we're talking about. Healthcare and education, which are incredibly expensive, should be provided collectively. And there's this is a very up for debate. We're a new organisation, but on the other end, there's things that should be able to be bought individually. And for those things, it's essential that people have access to enough money to be able to purchase those things. So that's it, right? This is what we mean by the social guarantee. We mean the universal services, and we also mean a living income for buying things that it isn't right to provide collectively. So it's really important that I say here that by living income, we're not talking about UBI. We're talking about a minimum income guarantee or an income floor. There has to be a level of income that nobody can fall beneath, and this can be met through employment with a real living wage, or through cash benefits if people are unable to work. Or yeah. As I said, there's loads of different sorts of services, and these need to be these needs need to be met in loads of different ways. So sometimes the state will provide these needs, sometimes local organisations will, cooperatives, community-led businesses, and local authorities and the state. So different types of organisations can meet these needs, and but there's fundamental principles that need to apply. So the first is that access to life's essentials is an absolute entitlement. So nobody should be denied access to these things that they fundamentally need. Access is based on need and not ability to pay. Nobody should be homeless, for example, just because they don't have enough money. Power is devolved to the lowest appropriate level. So this is about increased economic democracy, and it's about including service users in the design and creation of these services. As I said, diverse models of ownership and control, so a myriad of different organisations to deliver these services, dependent on the place that they are and what's appropriate to those. And the co-production of services, yeah, absolutely. So end users must be involved and have meaningful participation when creating these services. But of course, technical expertise is also required. Fair play and employment practices. They need to be enforceable. So if somebody doesn't have access to these needs, it's essential that someone steps in and ensures that they are able to gain access to these things. And then, of course, sustainable. It's absolutely essential that that the delivery of these needs fits within planetary boundaries. And it's really important to say here that when we're talking about moving the centrality of our economic and political system to meeting needs rather than the pursuit of profit, that is a complete rehaul of what we're doing, and it places planetary boundaries at the core and living with sustainably within the core of all economic activity. So finally, there's the role of the state. So the state does play a big part in this. Sometimes it will directly deliver services. But beyond that, its role is to guarantee equality of access. So as I said earlier, if there's holes in the provision of services, it's up to the state to step in and either fill these holes directly or enable local organisations to be able to fill those holes. It's up to the state to set and enforce standards. So environmental standards, employment standards, and the rest of it. It's up to the state to collect, invest and distribute funds and distribute them in an equitable way so that the state will continue to do taxation and distribute funds. And then it's also the role of the state to coordinate this activity and communication between different service providers to ensure that, best practice is shared and that this can continue. So lastly, the benefits of the social guarantee, the benefits of this way to provide services is obviously first and foremost sustainability. As I say, once you shift the focus of the economy onto meeting people's needs that are sufficient as opposed to the pursuit of profit, then being ecologically sustainable becomes a central part of all economic activity. Equality, so absolutely everybody having access to these things is really important, and in the context of thinking of the sort of wages, UBS is a social wage. So yes, we'll have we'll have cash benefits where necessary, but these the collective provision of services is inherently redistributive. So people on low incomes will pay a massively higher proportion of their income on these services. So by providing these services free at the point of use or genuinely affordable price, it's massively redistributive. And with universal services and a minimum income floor, it goes a long way to eradicating poverty. Efficiency, like we know that private healthcare, for example, is much less efficient. Profit extraction by definition costs money. So the collective provision of services is much more efficient. And lastly, solidarity, right? It's not about building a safety net that people can poke holes through. It's about us saying as a society that we don't believe that anybody should go without having their needs met. And it's about society laying a strong foundation upon which everybody can build a good life. So that is it from me. Just to reiterate, it's all about meeting people's needs. And we believe that, this framework that we've devised is very malleable and could be applied to a lot of different things. As I say, it could be the middle rung of the donut or part of a Just Green New Deal. And we'd be really interested to hear from you guys about how it can fit in with degrowth as well. So yes, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Maeve. Perhaps I could bring in Anna Saave at this point. Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Dan and Maeve and Jan for already initiating the discussion. And thanks also to the organizers for bringing us together to talk about provisioning to meet basic needs within limits. I think this is a very pressing topic. And I'm going to speak about the CARE tax today, which is a policy proposal in the making. And let me share my slides. Yes. So the CARE tax is an idea originating from the Swiss and German context, and it is also, it makes sense in this context to think about it that way. This is it is embedded within industrialized societies with aging populations, and where a large part of caring activities is already commodified. So while my colleagues who were talking about UBI and universal services and other proposals aim to provide answers to the question of how to distribute the money within society, I would like to highlight a complementary perspective And this is the question of where do the funds come from? So we need to better fund the care sector, but how can we do it? And I'm focusing away from the question of distribution to collection, but I believe that there has to be a back and forth between those two perspectives to actually come to viable societal solutions. Okay, so I'm going to speak about the care tax today, and this policy proposal obviously addresses the care sector, which includes all paid and unpaid care services. And I'm especially going to deepen some arguments for how one can justify to raise taxes to actually fund this sector in the society. We see some sectors like the IT or other industries, which can create a relatively high surplus value or profits. And this is not so much the case for the care sector, as care work usually doesn't generate high profits. Care work happens when people take their time to care for others, and making care work more efficient usually results in a loss of quality of care. So organizing care work is a collective challenge because everyone needs care work, at least at some point. And despite this, the care sector is precariously organized. Okay, do this manually, yeah. The corona pandemic has acted as a catalyst to make some of these precarious conditions more visible, but not all. And I brought this picture from Ricardo Lange, who sort of became the face of intensive care in Germany under the pandemic. And he reports here to our government. Such reports of overwork and high stress loads are unfortunately not news. This is more a structural problem. And so the question was also before COVID happened, how do we finance this, and why do we not redistribute our collective financial resources to solve the financing problem of care? Against this backdrop, Tove Soiland makes a proposal. I'm not sure if I can, yes, now it works. Tove Soiland makes a proposal and she says, if we can raise eco taxes, then we can also raise care taxes. I took a closer look at this hypothesis to find out whether this is true, or to what extent one can make an analogy between economic policy in the environmental sector and in the care sector. And I think Soiland's general idea seems promising, as it allows solving the problem of underpaid or unpaid care work, not on the level of individual choices, but on a societal or even fiscal level. But this proposal is vague, and so we need to work on it a little more. And based on the status quo that the care sector is underfunded, which places a variety of burdens on caregivers and care receivers, the care sector needs to be better funded. And this is only one part of the solution to the care crisis, obviously. Where can it come from? There are similar funding challenges in the environmental realm. There the question is, where can financial resources for environmental protection come from? And the rationale behind payments for environmental protection, for example, under the ecological tax reform in Germany, is the internalization of negative externalities. The ecological tax reform internalizes damage caused by CO2 emissions by implementing a consumer tax on fossil fuels. So what's behind that is that it is assumed some parties have certain behavior, like the use of fossil fuels, which has a particularly high impact on the environment. And then to internalize consequential costs of this behavior, a tax is implemented, in this case, on products with a relatively high carbon footprint. And this is all done to compensate for so-called market failures. A similar but not quite the same rationale can be formulated for the care sector. In the care sector, relatives provide care for free and under already precarious conditions. Most of this work is female. And the commodified part of care work is also largely female and racialized work, which is often badly paid, and care workers experience severe stress. So in sum, you could say, people are exploited for free or overexploited where care is commodified. And compared to the environmental sector, however, the situation is different. Yeah, what if it's not CO2 emissions this time? What can be identified as a negative externality? In the care sector, we have welfare loss, but it is happening because of the exertion of underpaid services. What we cannot see is one harmful activity done by one causal agent of the time and cost pressure on care work. Quite the contrary, what stands out is that care work has positive external effects for third parties. So in this case, care work are the desirable activities. And we now need to work with this constellation and transfer it to a policy measure. I see several possible justifications for a care tax and would like to mention two of them. One would be to tax beneficiaries of care work, but who actually benefits from care work? Of course, society as a whole, and also those who use labor profitably, including businesses, because they use labor to generate profits and care work reproduces this labor power. Also, employers profit from the fact that some people do care work, since this frees other people from the responsibility to do this work and they actually got time to go to some job. So this is one aspect of how care work supplies employers with personnel. Moreover, employers profit as they pay workers for their work, but not for the care work that enable them to be and to become workers. And this is not already priced in. In addition, providers of care services profit. They are responsible for providing care, and they profit in a way that low wages mean fewer costs in their balance. So within the macroeconomic framework of externalities, this situation calls for a subsidy. And the logic behind a subsidy for the profiting party is, I profit from your work, so I give you more money so that you can do more or better care work. But those who profit actually don't seem to be so interested in this kind of internalization, as there is no such voluntary payment. But still, the internalization could be organized by could be implemented by an organized intervention of the state as a tax on those who profit, which is version A here. And in this version, all parties profiting from care work would be taxed to then use the tax revenue to subsidize the care sector. And this can happen in case fiscal legislation in the respective country allows this link to happen. Now I would like to present another version of the care tax, which goes one step further. So this is version C. Compared to the manufacturing sector, in care work, there are relatively clear limits to productivity growth. This is because services in the labor-intensive care economy cannot be made more efficient at will. Feeding the children or bathing a sick person always takes a certain amount of time. Some activities, on the other hand, can become ever more productive because a part of them can be automated. In comparison to those, the productivity of care work seems to be rather steady. However, there is a prevailing conception that all work, also care work, can be made always more productive. And all economic subjects are exposed to this claim of being able to become more and more productive. The origin of this requirement cannot be tracked back to a single person. Therefore, there is no one subject causing time pressure and pressure to reduce costs. And those who profit from positive externalities can't automatically be identified as the initiators of the situation. Yeah, but there is a mechanism which causes damage in the care sector. It's the requirement of an increase in productivity towards certain work that cannot be made ever more productive. If one considers this phenomenon as a driver of time and cost reduction pressure, then this process has to be influenced for an internalization. Therefore, the care tax can be concretized as a taxation of profits from productivity increases and their redistribution to the care sector. However, this meant that the rationale of internalization of externalities already had to be expanded to be applied here. And with this, we leave the field of solutions inherent to microeconomics, because under this paradigm, only economic subjects can be influenced, but not processes or mechanisms, because they are regarded as quasi-natural. And this is why the taxation of sectors with high productivity gains can be seen as a societal innovation. Okay, let me conclude. The analogy, if you can raise eco-taxes, then you can also raise care taxes, is partly valid. Compared to the ecological tax reform, there's no clearly identifiable undesired activity, like emitting CO2 in the case of care. Therefore, only a mechanism could be identified causing time and cost-saving pressure. Nevertheless, it's clear that care work contributes to society and the economy, and that these contributions are not sufficiently compensated. What we need, therefore, and my colleagues have already said this before, is an investment in care infrastructure. And this means a steady investment, because care work is constantly necessary for society and has positive side effects beyond the actual care situation. A care tax could be implemented in several ways, two of which I explained. But what is exactly tax? For example, profits from productivity increases, or the turnover of companies in sectors with high productivity increases, or maybe financial transactions. This must be weighed up on the basis of the financing needs in the care sector and within democratic processes. What is certain, however, is that a care infrastructure does not finance in itself, and the current lack of funding has unacceptable consequences that must be minimized as soon as possible in the interest of a sustainable society. So in the end, one has to ask, does a care tax change the way care is currently organized in a preferable way? And I'd like to quote Adelheid Biesecker on that, who describes the care tax in the second version I explained, the intervention in diverging productivities, as the better alternative of the two presented. She says, I prefer this version as it seems like a Trojan horse. We start from this economic system, keep this conception of productivity for a while, but redistribute profits from productivity gains to enable care work, which actually follows quite a different logic than just productivity. So this was the complementary set of questions. Where does the money come from? And I'm looking forward to connecting those different perspectives.
Thank you so much, Anna. And last but not least, Vincent, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hello, everybody. So I would like first to start to thank a lot the local organizing committee, who's been going through very difficult time to organize this fantastic conference. Of course, I'm quite disappointed that we are not all together gathering in Manchester, in the great city of Manchester. I had the opportunity to visit in the time of the preparation of the conference, but still it's great that we have this online conference. It's great that we can have this conversation today and all these plenaries and session all along this week. So thanks a lot for the local organizing committee for the great effort and how you could keep your motivation in very hard time. So thanks a lot, John and Mark in particular, and all the partners who've been involved in this organization. So after saying that, let's jump into the topic. I will start with an introduction. I don't have slides, so I tried to wake you up after lunch, which is still very difficult for a French to give a talk at this time, but I tried to deal with that. I will start with an introduction. I will develop a bit what motivated us to go to this unconditional autonomy allowance, and I will conclude to present what is inside this autonomy, unconditional autonomy allowance. So what is very important, that degrowth started to be interested in France in the late 2000s in basic income, because we could see that it could be helpful under certain conditions and while connected to other type of economic and social tools, it could be an interesting tool for a degrowth project. And I think it's very important when you start to speak about such things like unconditional basic income, unconditional basic services whatsoever. I would say any kind of economic tool, the main question is not whether you're in favor or against it, but the main question is to do what? And that's the same for any kind of tool. You know, with a hammer, you can do something very meaningful. You can construct furniture, but you can also beat somebody. And I would say the same with unconditional basic income. It can be used for very great purposes. I think it can be an interesting tool in a particular framework for a degrowth political agenda, but it can also be something totally devastating for the environment, for social justice, to reinforce neoliberalism or capitalism and so on. So that's my first point. And starting from that, what was the motivation behind unconditional basic income? So the first question what we had in degrowth was really the question about democracy. I think degrowth can be substituted most of the time by democracy. It's really a project about direct democracy, how to revive, how to be creative to have much more democracy. And democracy requires autonomy, empowerment, trust between the people, what we don't have at all in our society. And that's where we connected unconditional basic income with unconditional basic services, with local currencies, local exchange system, where we saw in these tools, interesting tool to recreate dynamics of security, of serenity in our society, to re-empower the people, giving them the opportunity to quit their bullshit job or their toxic type of job, to go above type of precarity, and to be re-empowered and to become again citizens who can be active in the society. Also such tools, in particular the more local ones like local currency, are interesting tool to recreate interactions, solidarities, informal solidarities in territories between the people and to revive democracy. So without such trust, without such security feeling, without such serenity, there is no chance to have any kind of democracy. So the first motivation we had in the French degrowth movement when we started to deal with unconditional basic income was really about democracy, about how to reconnect the people, how to repoliticize the society, resocialize politics. The second point we were very interested in was, of course, the question of inequalities. So basic income could provide the minimums for all to have a decent life, and it's one of the main principles of degrowth. And also question inequalities is to question maximum income. We started to also open the debate about maximum acceptable income. And for us, unconditional basic income or unconditional basic services or unconditional autonomy allowance should necessarily be connected with maximum income, and to question what ratio you have between the minimum income and the maximum income. So in most of our texts, most of our books in France, we speak about a ratio from 1 to 4 between the minimum income and the maximum income. But when you speak about inequalities, it's not only inequalities in incomes, which are problematic, but unfortunately nowadays inequalities are also are maybe more and more dominant in terms of property, in terms of wealth, in terms of the need to redistribute real estate, to question heritage. So going through questioning inequality, we have to open this very sensitive debate, which can be emotional. So we have to find way to do it smartly in a non-violent way. The question of redistribution through heritage, to tax, to question whether we still keep such a high heritage and so on, because we can see that the richest people are rich because of heritage and because of speculation based on their property rather than income or rather than their work and so on. Also questioning inequalities, it's about where do we put the money? Do we still invest a lot of money on advertisement, as we do nowadays, on the military-industrial complex, on a large infrastructure development project, which are imposed and which are driving us to the wrong direction? It's also the question, where do we put the money for research? Do we invest always more and more money in artificial intelligence, in transhumanism, in green technologies and so on, like hydrogen and all these type of things where there is really gushing money? Or on the contrary, do we invest the money on non-violent communication, on ecofeminism, on care economy, on the commons, on direct democracy, on low tech, on permaculture or agroecology and so on? So it's also questioning inequalities. It's also to question and to implement political debates, public deliberation about all these questions. And where do we want to put the common effort in research, in investment, in what kind of infrastructure, in what kind of on things? So the next point is about how to re-embed the economy. speaking about unconditional basic income or unconditional autonomy allowance, it's really to question what is the currency? What is money? How does it work? What is money creation? What is a central bank? What is its role? What kind of governance do you have for the central bank? For what kind of interest the central bank is nowadays working? What kind of public and private debt do you have? Where are they coming from? Shouldn't we implement type of public audit about this public debt to implement a different type of more participatory governance for central bank, to question also the financiarization of the economy, to question tax evasion, to question tax optimization, and so on. So behind that is really the question that we need type of economic tools, not to reinforce the dominance of economy in our society, not to reinforce neoliberalism, but on the contrary, to re-embed the economy and to put back the economy in its right place and to use the economy as an interesting democratic tool for a radical transformation of our society. We were motivated with all that ideas and so on, and we ended up with that proposal called unconditional autonomy allowance, which is a bit like an unconditional basic income, but partially demonetarized. It is given in cash, it is given in local currency, it is given in universal basic services with the logic of free access to types of services, but also free access to certain goods as Maeve presented it. And it is given also in the logics that I would say that it's not a technical tool. It's rather like a pretext to implement public deliberation, to revive democracy, and to collectively question what are our basic needs, what is really the minimum we need to have decent life, and to be creative in the way you implement such deliberation, and to question how do we fulfill these basic needs. And I would say when you implement the logic of unconditional autonomy allowance, you can start in a decentralized way. You can start sector by sector. You can start on a national way, like you can first implement unconditional basic income, and step by step, you demonetize your unconditional basic income. You can start with unconditional basic services, and step by step, you implement more things parallel to that, like local currencies and so on. But in all these steps, it's really the question of democracy. It's really the question about a bit what's happened, and I think we can be influenced by that. What's happened with the French Citizen Convention for Climate. So to invent with a lot of creativity, a lot of new types of democratic political institution. It could be like the Citizen Convention for Climate, where you choose by chance people who decide and who can deliberate about what kind of political agenda do we implement toward climate change and social justice. But you could do the same about water. You could do the same about public debt. You could do the same about property rights. You could do the same about care economy. You could do the same about housing. You could do the same about all these type of things. And I think that's really the idea about unconditional autonomy allowance. It's to use a very large set of tools which are already on the table, which are debated. These tools are all interesting. They can be used for wrong purposes. They can be misused like any kind of tools, but put together with an interesting political agenda around degrowth, it can be very powerful, and we can go step by step in a logic of creating serenity, creating trust, reinventing democracy, inventing new type of political entity, and social and environmental justice, the limits which will be implemented collectively and so on, to create the logic of a political agenda for degrowth. And it's what we developed in this book with Otto Andersson, Exploring Degrowth, which is, I invite you to buy it now because we have 50% discount made by the publisher at this time. And I would say that we keep on going with that debate, what we have today. And I think it's very important. And it's always been my approach of degrowth. And I think degrowth is very interesting in this perspective, that it's really the idea to go to pick all around a lot of different type of challenge, a lot of different type of proposals which are put on the table, and how to create interaction between them, complementarities between them, dialogue between the different people, bringing all these interesting progressive ideas on the table, and how step by step we can create type of alliances between unconditional basic income, unconditional basic services, care income, gratuité, as we say in French, free access for basic services, and the logic of maximum income, etc., etc. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And thank you to all of you for 4 very interesting interventions. I'm sure they've already provoked a lot of questions and discussion in the chat box. And I'd encourage you all watching to contribute to that chat. We will open out this discussion very soon. But just before we do, would anyone on the panel like to respond or offer their thoughts on any of the comments or points made by the other panelists?
Well, I have some points to say about the social guarantee. I think that this is actually what we are trying to do in Finland. And when it comes to health and education, it's almost free. And if you do, for some reason, lack money to buy for food or lodgings, you can get it from the Kela, the system we had, which is giving a kind of basic service and income to everybody. But it's very bureaucratic, or very well. It must be bureaucratic if you're going to find out what do this family need exactly, how much money do you have to give. And so I would say that for instance, when it comes to paying the rents in Helsinki, which are very high, well, then it is supported quite a lot. It is growing the support all the time. So it's a quite expensive way of paying the high rents for quite a lot of the people. When it comes to the care tax, I find it's very interesting. The problem is that how do you internalize this for the firms? Well, when it comes to certain things like education and others, maybe they can say in a way internalize, but the most growing expensive things is actually care for the elderly. And there is not any, for a firm, very little, so to say, internal. If you try to internalize that for a firm, they say, well, we don't care, actually, they can die away. That would, so it's very difficult to make it in a good way. To some extent, what is going on in politics here in Finland is that the firms which higher productivity, they say that we are feeding all, more or less. We are paying the taxes and you are living on that. And so there is this problem of the care sector where you have to try to raise the wages in the same way as you raise wages in the industry and other places. And this means that caring becomes more and more expensive, actually. And so this is called the bobol disease, which we have. And the only way to deal with this is actually to raise the tax level overall. So I find it quite interesting to be here, and I listened to Vincent also, and I think he is right that if you would have a basic income, that would lead to a different kind of politics, which from that what we have today, and people could really engage more directly in both local and maybe national affairs. Thank you.
Maeve or Anna, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess on the I think the point you were making, Jan, was that it's UBS is very bureaucratic and expensive, and I think it's really important. So you gave the example of housing, and I think that you need to look at the social guarantee as this whole suite of different things. So housing being really expensive is an issue that also the collective provision of services can address. So the idea that housing in Helsinki is too expensive is a problem of how we pay for and produce housing. So if, as part of the social guarantee, affordable housing is an essential part of that. So it's talking about income, but it's talking about two sides of the coin. So you've got a cash wage and you've got a social wage. So as part of your social wage, it would be about collectively providing these things like expensive housing that people need, so that you wouldn't have to have extortionate cash payments to accommodate that. Yeah, that's my response to that.
Thanks very much, Maeve. John, can I bring you in at this point? I assume questions and comments have been going in.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dan. Thanks to all the presenters and participants. We have over 40 questions that have come in. So apologies in advance if I don't get to go through them all. But one issue that, and it's the top ranked voted upon question, and it really is for everybody, but particularly perhaps for Jan Otto, is that we're not sure how we could get around basic income not increasing overconsumption in the global north. And the proposition is, isn't a basic services focus a better way for meeting needs without overconsumption? So perhaps Jan Otto and then maybe Maeve would like to come in, and perhaps Vincent.
Yeah, my preference would be that we start with basic income in the poor countries, actually, because there the consequences would be very, very important. You just, if you live on $2 a day or something and you get $2 more, that is 100% more than you used. So but even in the rich countries, it is, as it was said about the social guarantee, there is some need for money for the individual consumption, and either you distribute it by a quite bureaucratic way of looking at how much people really need, or you could lessen this bureaucracy by having some kind of basic income. It need not be a full basic income. For many people, a small addition is already enough.
That's great, thank you. So to you, Maeve, do you think basic services is a way of avoiding overconsumption while meeting basic needs, and superior, therefore, to basic income?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think that. I think it's not just about, I mean, so obviously we're not investing enough in people in the north, in the global north anyway, but there is like a limit to the amount of money that there is, regardless of that. And we just haven't got the fiscal space to be able to say, right, everybody needs to have a universal basic income that's at a level that will actually go a long way to keeping them out of poverty. And we can have also really well-run services. That it's this idea that, yeah, it's on a spectrum. It is, they're both a wage. And I think that it's much more efficient and it's much more environmentally sustainable to be investing in the collective provision of services. I think also just on a sort of philosophical point, which is really important, it's about what culturally you're trying to stimulate. So if you're talking about, like I was saying in my presentation, like we as a society are saying that you will not fall below this floor, you will have your basic needs met. That's a really strong message. With universal basic income, it's depending on markets. It's saying you individually are responsible for ensuring that your needs are met. And I think that in this future, in this green and just future, we need to be collaborating and working together and really accentuating solidarity within society rather than depending on markets and pushing individualism.
Okay, that's great. Vincent, do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I think it's, again, UBI, an universal basic income can be a terrible tool. I mean, I don't know why the Keynesians are not supporting it in this time of crisis. It can be the most fantastic tool to create a growth or green growth or inclusive growth, that you distribute money. The banks are happy. They can even make more loans to the people. We can buy even more stuff. The companies are happy. They can sell a lot of bullshit stuff and so on and so on. So again, unconditional basic income should be implemented in a particular political framework. like if you implement it without this framework, it can go to any kind of direction. About overconsumption, I wouldn't be so much pessimistic because there are interesting converging surveys all around the Western world or most of the countries in the world that people are not necessarily looking for consuming always more and more and more and more. They are looking for new types of things, and there are interesting dynamics around that. So if you implement unconditional basic income and in parallel, public deliberation about advertisement and how advertisement is manipulating our brain to desire things what we don't really need, it can be very interesting. And you regulate very radically advertisement, and instead of spending on advertisement, you spend money on public deliberation, questioning what is a frugal abundance, what are the meaningful needs, how to reappropriate it, and so on. You would avoid this problem. And that's where you need, again, unconditional basic income in a framework. And if you connect it with universal basic services about housing, for example, you would avoid the risk of speculation and inflation, because it's quite likely that the day you will start to implement unconditional basic income, immediately the rents will increase for your accommodation and so on. So if you do it without being prepared with that, and if you do it without radical thought about the commons toward housing and to rethink property or type of regulation around and so on, you will create type of inflation which will be totally useless. And I would say it should be, again, implemented in the logic of public deliberation about what are meaningful consumptions and what should we put for free for meaningful consumptions. And the other could be different in different type of political entity, territories, and depending on a lot of parameters and so on. And it should be also implemented with the logic of limits. So if you implement unconditional basic income without maximum income and all these debates, quite likely you could end up with very terrible consequences. Experience has shown that these terrible consequences didn't really happen when it was experimented in low scale. It was not really unconditional basic income. So we have a lot of good reason to be optimistic, but even more if we connect it with a lot of different type of political framework to avoid all these misusage of unconditional basic income or unconditional basic services.
That's great. Thank you, Vincent. If I could turn to you, Anna, there's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat, perhaps the most pertinent given the conference that we're at. Somebody has asked, how is the care tax conducive to degrowth? So perhaps, Anna, if you could respond to that.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I'd like to answer to what Jan Otto has raised earlier about caring for the elderly and how this is not a big of an incentive of companies to let their taxes go there. Even when companies buy into the logic that I proposed, which is essentially feminist Marxism since the wages for housework debate. So even if the contributions of care work to the reproduction of labor power are accounted for, then this does not necessarily mean that from a profit-making perspective, you should invest into elder care because those people will not end up in the workforce anymore, probably. This is true. But if we put care work first in the concept of a caring economy, then of course, all care is meant by that, and I think this is most of all an ethical decision, and how we redistribute financial resources has to be one step lower than our ethical decisions, and this is my reaction to your concern around that. But I think the fundamental thing is, and something that is also maybe covered or quoted by UBI proposals, is that the care sector probably won't generate profits in this world. And as long as we have a market economy, there will be sectors which generate profits. So how do we mediate this? This is the question. And within UBI proposals, there is always this risk of re-traditionalization of the family in case some jobs still are very well paid, and then a universal basic income will be something that's good enough for all the people who don't have access to the higher paying jobs. And so from this care perspective and from its long tradition of gender roles that are ingrained in it, we have to think about UBI and maybe also about allowances or services in this kind of way. So how is this connected to degrowth? You could say a care tax, when it's implemented as a tax on productivity gains, is maybe, to put it bluntly, a tax on capitalism. So I think if you are a proponent of degrowth and you are maybe a little bit critical of the market economy, then the care tax could help to actually reduce inequality produced by this economic system. And also investing in care, which, for example, I think the Women's Budget Group in UK has shown, investment in care is green investment. Maeve is nodding. Maybe you can fill in some more info on that. So if you invest the same amount as Himmelweit and DNO have found out, the same amount of money in construction as in care work, you can get lots, 6 times more jobs for women out of the same amount of investment, and just a little less jobs for men. So the employment effect of investing in care is big, and it comes with relatively low CO2 emissions. So if we invest in jobs and when we want to have a green investment, then going for care is a good strategy.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. So there's a couple of questions I want to bring together in terms of some concerns. This really probably is to Jan Otto and perhaps Maeve. Concerns that a UBI continues a commodification mode of provision of meeting of basic human needs, and that perhaps maybe a decommodified form like basic services is better. But also allied to that is the recent, I think, in Alaska, where they've had a form of basic income where Republicans were voted back in Alaska on the basis of cutting welfare services to increase the basic income. So a trade-off in terms of both the commodification of the provision of needs, but also the danger that UBI will trump the meeting of welfare provided services and goods. So perhaps Jan Otto on this issue of the commodification, and then perhaps maybe you want to come in after Jan Otto.
Well, what is important with commodification is about a labor power. If you have a basic income, maybe you could get less decommodification of labor, and that I think would be quite important. I think that most, at least in Finland, of those who are in favor of a basic income, and we have several parties which are, they all stress that the basic services come first. In a way, we have to have education and we have to have the health sector well financed. That is, but we need a lot of also called social assistance, and the question is, could this social assistance be given in a less bureaucratic way than today? And so it's clear that it would not really give new money to anybody who is above even a part of the median income. That would be taxed away, this basic incomes. So and this is now in a way possible to do, because we have a system where the taxing the tax and social assistance authorities, they have in real time they know exactly what everybody earns. So you can monthly give or take from that income, so that you get the kind of basic income that you have preferred, without and even within the tax system which we have at the moment.
Great. Thank you, Jan Otto. Maeve, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I think that the Alaska example really highlights the amount that sort of UBI, how dependent that is on the state and what the state wants to do. I think what we're talking about with the social guarantee is more along the lines of what Vincent was talking about increasing local democracy and enabling local people and local communities to be able to meet their own specific needs. And as we know, different places, different geographies require different things. A house in Manchester, where I am, is completely different to a house in, I don't know, Berlin. So yeah, I think that it's really important that the universal basic services or the social guarantee is all about strengthening local democracy. And then if a national government comes in and decides to, it basically takes power away from the central state. Whereas I think with UBI, if it is distributed from a central state, that's a lot more difficult to do, and you're a lot more at mercy of the whims of whatever the politics of the day is. Yeah, and I think that what Jan Otto was talking about that, basically it seems like you're talking about a sort of version of what we're talking about with an income floor, that there's an income level that nobody's allowed to fall below. And I think, yeah, if you put power in the hands of local people, and if you make some of that income in kind rather than just cash income, it means that income is not as flexible and malleable depending on what political party is in power at the time.
That's great, thank you, Maeve. There's a couple of questions for everybody, but before I come back and give open questions to all the panelists, there's one specific question to Vincent and one to Anna. So Vincent, somebody says, why have the goal of 1:4 inequality ratio? Why not have the goal of actual equality, i.e. 1:1? So that's, if you have to think about that. And Anna, somebody's asked the question here, how can we measure productivity increases, particularly given that productivity gains are hard to measure for services, and usually output in services is equated with salary. So the productivity question for yourself, Anna, and this the inequality ratio, Vincent, if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, but the inequality ratio, it was very interesting because we did it in the framework of European election in France in 2009, and we went to other political party and we made the type of radical approach from 1:4, which pushed all the other green left party to add it to their political agenda, but with a ratio from 1 to 2030. So to speak about it is opening the debate, and to have no difference between the minimum and the maximum was a debate what we had inside degrowth, but I think it's a debate which should be open within the society. And I believe that you need to find the right balance between individual freedom and what is feasible to do to respect the freedom of everybody. So it's always this dilemma what we face in our society between my freedom and the other people freedom. And I think it's good to have a ratio between the minimum and the maximum. The maximum should be within the planetary limits, so it shouldn't be a way of life which is unsustainable. And the minimum should be totally sustainable. And between this 1 to 4, you allow type of freedom, and you don't have to have a type of accountancy or bureaucratic authoritarian system to follow everybody, that everybody is really following the things. And based on that, again, my approach when I speak about the maximum income, I would say it's not to end up with a very bureaucratic implementation of this proposal and with a lot of police work to investigate if everybody is really respecting this maximum income, but rather a type of individual empowerment, that I don't want to run for always more goods or become always richer and richer or higher and higher income, because it's something which doesn't make sense. It's something which doesn't include me within the society, doesn't connect me with other people, doesn't make me happy. And I would say that again, the most important, it's not what you achieve at the end, but how do you open this debate and how do you make the people appropriate this question, and how in an autonomous way people self-implement their own limits toward this debate. So I like to let it from 1 to 4 and to let the people debate and reflect on that and to decide individually what kind of limit do self-implement for themselves.
Just before I let you in, Anna, I can't help but think, Vincent, on what you've said of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said, I think, in The Social Contract, that the divisions in society should be that no one is rich enough to buy another, or nobody's poor enough that they're forced to sell themselves. And here we are, a couple of hundred years later, still discussing these issues of what is the correct ratio. But Anna, to a different kind of philosophical, mathematical problem for you in terms of measuring productivity in the context of your argument for a care tax.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a very helpful question for continuing the discussion about it. So measuring productivity is usually quite easily done by measuring how much output with the same amount of labor can be achieved, and then compare it, and then this would be a productivity increase of some person working or of some machine being employed to do a certain task. And I think within the question was also the info, what do we do with wage then as an indicator of productivity? And I think these are already two approaches on how to measure productivity. And I guess the ecofeminist reflection of the care tax is adding a third dimension of thinking about productivity and wanting to question the possibility of measuring a productivity as it is reflected in the GDP, because this understanding of productivity is only half, it's distorted, because it does not value the whole area of what we call reproductive, in a lack of a better word. And what is actually the outcome of reproductive work? This is hard to say because, as I said, care is taking place when other people take time to care for others. How do you measure this? And then you end up with a set of even more difficult questions. So around the quality of care that needs to be accounted for. And so I think we need to continue the question of how we measure productivity, because by bringing in this policy proposal, I think what happens is that definitions of productivity actually shot through. This is what it's doing. It's complicating everything, and so different takes on productivity are maybe cannot be combined easily. But this is what's trying to be achieved here, and it will end up in trouble. And this is okay, because we have to, in Donna Haraway's words, stay with the trouble of trying to mediate those things.
That's great. Thank you. Although in Northern Ireland, we have a thing called the Troubles, which you don't want to have anything to do with, given it's another way of describing a war we had here for 30 years. I want to start to wind up now, folks, for the last 10 minutes or so, and put questions to all the panelists. So one is a really important issue, trying to bring a sense out of a rapprochement or a dialogue between basic income and UBS. And the question is this, is that it helps to see cash income and the social wage, universal basic services, as two sides of the same coin. So to each panelist, how best can we ensure that they support rather than undermine each other? So I'll come to Jan Otto first, then Maeve, then Anna, then Vincent. So Jan Otto.
Well, I think it's the same in a sense that we want to have a universal welfare state, and that includes both basic services and a guarantee that you have enough money to live on. Now, of course, you can have both, but if you don't get more money for the municipalities and for the state, then there is often a trade-off, and you have to choose. And this is a very difficult choice. When it comes to basic services, you can say that most citizens are clearly for it, whereas when it comes to giving a kind of minimum money income to those needing it, then it's only a weak minority which is working for it. So it is a disadvantage, and that goes for the basic income ideas also. So there must be a lot of solidarity if you are going to get a basic income which is good enough. But I think that by framing it as a social dividend and explaining why everybody should have a little part of the profits which the society produces, that is easier to get political support for such a thing.
That's
and
great,
also for a participation income.
That's great, thanks again.
So for political reasons, at least, I think this is how we should do it.
That's great, cheers. Maeve.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with the social guarantee. We recognise that there's this ongoing tension between UBS and UBI, which we just don't think is very helpful. Obviously, there's people on the far right who are gunning for UBI, and we obviously want to separate ourselves from that. But people on the progressive left who are talking about UBI and all of the sort of kinds of arguments that Jan Otto's giving, we agree, right? The point is people need to feel secure, they need to feel safe, and we need to stay within planetary boundaries. We absolutely agree on these points. And so what we're trying to do with the social guarantee is center the things that we agree on. And yeah, as Jan Otto was saying, services are an essential part of that. And I think on the sort of political argument, again, hence why we've gone with the framing social guarantee, I think it rolls off the tongue and it's a lot more easy to argue for. I think that our services have been undermined for decades now, and it's not so obvious that most people are for it, particularly with Anna's points with the caring industries. The caring industries are in pieces, and caring industries is labour intensive, relatively low carbon work. It's the bedrock of the work we need to be doing in a green economy. So yeah, it's absolutely essential that people have enough money to live on, and we absolutely agree. And it's absolutely essential that people are well cared for and have their needs met, and often that is through the collective provision of services. So in answer to that question of how do we try and smooth over the differences, that's exactly what the social guarantee is trying to do.
That's great, thank you, Maeve. Anna?
Yeah, what we haven't talked yet about is the question of some usually comes up. So can we monetize or commodify all care work that is taking place? We can't. All studies have shown that if you even pay a minimum wage to all people doing care work for all the time that they do it, then this totally exceeds, for example, Germany's total government spending in 1 year. So this is not the solution. Still, we need infrastructure, and I think universal services could be the redistribution side of form of tax collection, which could be the care tax. And I think on top of that, UBI will help. But coming from the care perspective, I think in order for UBI to be effective, we not only need to redistribute funds, but also time. So when everybody does somehow an equal share of care work, then UBI will mean this similar or the same opportunities for all kinds of people. But I think we need to, at this point, include talking about the redistribution of time to make UBI and universal services in combination fair in terms of opportunities.
Wonderful, thank you, Anna. Vincent?
Yeah, it's. I think that's really the role of degrowth to keep on trying to connect all these questions, these debates, and so on. And I really believe that unconditional basic income alone is very problematic, because everybody will project their own fears, their own imaginaries, and so on. So you will have people who would agree with you on the principle of social environmental justice and who would be against it. You will have people who would be with you on ecofeminism, who would reject it, and the same. And you will find the same with unconditional basic services, or you will find the same with a maximum income, or with money creation and political reappropriation of central bank or whatsoever, and so on. And based on our experience in France, what we did with the degrowth movement was really to talk to all these different people dealing in an isolated way or a narrow-minded approach with only one of that tool, with their own political agenda and so on, and try to connect all these ideas and try to somehow implement a dialogue, implement always more and more in-depth discussion. Yeah, I am in favor of unconditional basic income. It's very great because it pushes me to question my relationship with work, the question of bullshit jobs, the question of empowerment and so on, but it's in contradiction with that. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about care. Let's talk about ecofeminism. Let's talk about the risk of inflation or commodification or over-commodification of life and so on, and connect it with other type of debates and question. And I really believe that it's a work in progress. And what is interesting around all these tools is not their technical implementation, but it's really the debate, what you can implement around and how this tool can be very powerful to open our mindset, to decolonize our imaginaries, and step by step to be creative and experiment different type of relocalized, decentralized economic tools, redistribution, democratic tools, and so on. And that's really the what is powerful behind, which doesn't mean that if we have an opportunity to implement on EU level unconditional basic services or unconditional basic income and so on, we shouldn't move on, but we should always keep in mind that you need to keep alive all these debates and the connection with a lot of questions and problematic challenges which each individually may face.
Great, thank you. And apologies once again to all the questions on at the time has run away with us in terms of not being able to read out them all. But could I ask each panelist to give a really quick 30-second or so, and apologies to the question because it's a really important and interesting question. And the question is this, is that could the panel discuss how they've considered the experiences of disabled people in relation to their proposals? It's an issue that's often overlooked in degrowth. So again, apologies for only having such a short time, but I think it is an important issue. So perhaps Maeve, do you have a quick response to that?
Yeah, I mean, as quickly as I can. Yeah, absolutely. It's at the core of what we're talking about is making sure that people's needs met, and that's everybody's needs. And the fact that we've created this framework, and the point is to offer this framework to people so that the end service users are able to develop these and have meaningful contributions to what services they require and how those services are delivered. And that very much includes people with disabilities.
Perhaps Anna, you have a quick response.
Yeah. In Germany, we have a debate about inclusivity of the society and also of education, and not necessarily, it's not necessarily a question of being disabled or not, because all of us are maybe disabled at some point of time and we can't work. And what is our worth then in society? What can we contribute? And if we, in cases when people cannot contribute, but they are still included, then we speak of an inclusive society. And I think this is paramount for the way how people can belong to an environment and to a society. And I wanted to react to what Vincent just said, talking about the tools that we discuss as vehicles for discourse. I think this is true. We need good vehicles for discourse, but coming from this whole care sector perspective, which is in crisis, not only since the pandemic, creating discourse is not enough. We have to come to action. And as a colleague from Germany, Uta Meyer-Greve says, we don't have an understanding problem. We have an organizational problem. How do we bring things into action? And I just wanted to bring in this perspective complementary to vehicles for discourse.
In a similar way, we don't have a poverty problem, we have a wealth problem. Let's reframe the discussion. But colleagues, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there because we do want to try and stay to time. So I'm going to hand back now to Dan. Dan, back to you.
Many thanks, John. Yeah, and thanks to all of our panel for some very, very interesting presentations. I hope you've all found it very interesting and insightful. My thanks as well to John Barry for stepping in at very short notice. I haven't been able to see any of the questions in the chat box today. So thanks, John, for stepping in and monitoring the chat box and being the voice of the otherwise voiceless. It's much appreciated. Thank you all for engaging in whatever way you have. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference today. Thank you all.